The 1980s, the days before streaming, where "Be Kind or Rewind" was a tagline on every VHS movie that ever came from Blockbuster or grocery video store. When horror movies didn't need CGI, logic, or acting lessons, just a blob of mystery goo and a catchy tagline. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Reel and Rudder, the channel that braves the murky cinematic seas so you don't have to. Today, we're going to change our format a little bit. We're diving deep, and I mean really deep, back to a time of VHS tapes. If you're old enough to know what those are. If not, I'm sure your grandparents probably have a stack of them in their basement, buried in the most remote spider-covered corner possible. So the 80s brought us into some of the most beautifully ridiculous cult horror flicks of the decade that gave us big hair, big shoulder pads, and monsters made of foam, latex, and hope. So in lieu of the horror spirit, we are going to deviate from our normal reviews discussing movie quality and dive into a number of forgotten cult classic films. The time is forgotten, but we haven't. Where our nostalgia will come back alive and will hopefully remind everyone of the golden age of horror and where it all began. A time before instant streaming, Redbox, Blu-rays, DVDs. A time where VHS reigned supreme among the land. So first up, we're going to talk about 1985's The Stuff, the dessert that eats back. So horror fans, let's talk about one of the most deliciously ridiculous movies the 1980s ever served up, The Stuff. You know how every horror movie starts with some innocent discovery that obviously should have been left alone, right? Yeah, so this one begins with a guy poking at a mysterious white goo bubbling out of the ground, and instead of running away like a sane human being, he decides to eat it. What could possibly go wrong? So rule number one of horror movies, if it's oozing from the earth, don't eat it. If it moves on its own, definitely don't eat it. If it talks back, congratulations, you're probably already dead. But no, this guy licks the goo and apparently decides it's the best thing since Jello. And instead of calling NASA or maybe a priest, America does the most 80s thing ever possible. And that's turn it into a consumer product with a flashy label for people's consumption. They package it, brand it, and sell it as a new dessert sensation, The Stuff. No ingredients, no nutrition label, just trust us, it's tasty and only slightly sentient. And Americans, God bless them, start eating it by the gallon. The commercial even says, enough is never enough. Which, to be fair, is the most honest slogan ever printed during the Reagan era. Consumerism, goo, and a dash of paranoia. Now, The Stuff is supposed to be a satire 80s consumer culture film. How we'll mindlessly consume anything if it's marketed well enough. And it works. The whole country gets hooked on this mysterious dessert faster than kids got hooked on sugary cereal mascots. But here's the twist. The Stuff is actually alive. It's basically a mind-controlling alien marshmallow that eats you from the inside out. So you think you're having a tasty snack? Meanwhile, the sentient Cool Whip is taking over your brain like a yogurt-flavored invasion of the body snatchers. So enter our hero, industrial saboteur extraordinaire. Our hero in this movie is actually a corporate spy named Mo Rutherford, played by Michael Moriarty, who delivers every line like he's on a coffee high and vaguely unsure what movie he's actually in. So he's hired by rival dessert companies to find out what the stuff is actually made of. And I love that in this movie's universe, there's apparently an entire spy network dedicated to taking down pudding competitors. Imagine James Bond, but his mission briefing is 007 Nestle is planning world domination again, this time through whipped topping. So we can't forget to introduce the kid who knew too much. Meanwhile, there's this kid named Jason who discovers the horrifying truth after catching this stuff moving around in his refrigerator late one night, like it's auditioning for Dancing with the Stars. Of course, he naturally freaks out and starts screaming that the family dessert is alive, and his parents, being peak 80s suburban parents, immediately gaslit him. Now, Jason, don't be silly. The FDA approved it. Yes, the same FDA that also approved asbestos and lead paint. What a great track record they have. So when the yogurt attacks, so soon enough, people are walking around like dessert zombies. Their insides hollow out, their faces stretched in weird gooey smiles. The stuff oozes out of people's mouths, pours out of beds, and at one point, I kid you not, explodes out of a motel pillow like whipped cream in a pressure cooker. You haven't truly lived until you've seen a man smothered to death by a mattress full of yogurt. So the conspiracy deepens. Mo teams up with a grizzled military colonel, because of course he does, and together they declare war on the dessert industry. They storm a factory, shoot a lot of people who may or may not be filled with vanilla goo, and blow up the stuff's production plant like it's Die Hard Dairy Edition. And in the grand finale, they expose the evil dessert conspiracy live on TV because the 80s loved nothing more than a dramatic televised confession. So the moral of the story, maybe it's a commentary on mindless consumerism. Maybe it's about corporations will literally sell us poison if it's profitable enough. Or maybe, just maybe, it's about how everything in the 80s had to involve slime. Either way, The Stuff is the kind of movie that reminds you why we love these cult classics. Oh, it's campy as hell. It's weird. And it's full of practical effects that look like the grocery store exploded, and it somehow manages to make yogurt terrifying. It's part horror, a large part comedy, and part late-night infomercial from hell. So the next time you open a fridge and see something white and wiggly staring back at you, maybe just stick to the ice cream. Because remember, enough is never enough. So before we recorded this, I actually had to go back and start watching this movie again because it has been a long time since I've seen this. I remember watching this on the USA TV network, which I don't even know is around anymore because we have dived headfirst into the streaming culture to where I don't even keep cable anymore. So please let me know if USA is still a thing or not. But I remember this being on around Halloween time or really late at night on the weekends or like Christmas vacation. And it was always something that my dad would flip on the TV and be like, oh, hey, look, The Stuff. And he would get all excited about watching this really cheesy 1980s semi-horror, semi-comedy film. So, but that's what tonight's all about. So we're going to go through a couple more movies here in the next couple of minutes just to maybe bring up some nostalgia with some of you out there. Maybe to get you to dust off some of those VHS tapes or even look into watching these again just to see how cheesy and how corny they really are. But these 80s flashbacks, I have to admit, I actually like a lot of these really cheesy 80s movies a lot better than I do some of the newer movies that are out here. At least I know what I'm going to get when I watch it. I know it's from the 80s. I know it's a horror movie. I know it's going to be cheesy as hell. But that, to me, is part of the appeal. So everyone, our next film, the Cold War is raging. The hair is still big. The shoulder pad's still bigger. And Hollywood's burning question is, what if aliens invaded, but they were cute enough to sell plush toys? Enter Critters. A movie that said, let's take Gremlins, make it weirder, hungrier, and 40% cheaper. So the year is 1986, tiny teeth with a big appetite. So the movie starts with alien convicts called Krites escaping an intergalactic prison. They hijack a spaceship, fly to Earth, and crash land in, well, the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Because you're a bloodthirsty alien. What's better than the middle of nowhere, steady diet of farm animals? The Krites, or critters, as we call them, are little furballs with mouths full of razor blades and attitude straight out of a biker bar. They roll, they bite, they scream, they eat everything. Chickens, people, probably cable subscriptions. And who stands in their way? A farm family with shotguns and denim jackets. Because in the 1980s, that was the solution to everything. So enter the bounty hunters, space rock stars with laser guns. These guys are like if Men in Black joined Bon Jovi. They got laser cannons, glam rock hair, and the ability to shapeshift into anyone they see. One of them sees a rock music video and goes, yep, that's my new face, and spends the rest of the movie posing like he's about to drop an intergalactic mixtape. So the critters still eating people. The bounty hunters, still fabulous. So, 1988, Critters 2, the main course. So 2 years later, apparently, Kansas didn't suffer enough. The critters are back. So Critters 2, the main course, is the most 80s sequel title ever. It's bigger, gorier, and this time the critters invade an entire town. And when do they decide to attack? Easter. Because nothing says he is risen like being eaten alive by an alien furball in a buddy costume. So the chaos peaks when all the critters combine into a giant rolling death ball like Sonic the Hedgehog if you hated everything and tasted blood. Honestly, this sequel really slaps. It's self-aware, it's gory, and it knows exactly what it is. A buffet of 80s nonsense with extra cheese. So, we move on to Critters 3 in 1991. So, a familiar name you will see get his first acting appearance ever, Leonardo DiCaprio. The critters take their carnage to, well, an apartment building. Because why terrorize the countryside anymore when you can terrorize tenants behind on rent? So yes, before the Titanic, before Inception, before yelling, "I'm the king of the world," Leo was fighting hairballs the size of watermelons in a New York tenement. So the critters spend most of the movie chewing on electrical cords that cast dignity, while Leo looks like he's questioning every life choice. It's pure 90s direct-to-video magic. The acting, very questionable. The monsters, still adorable slices of death. And the budget, probably 2 large pizzas. Then let's move on to Critters 4 in 1992. In space, no one can hear you purr. Because when a horror franchise runs out of ideas, you blast those little suckers directly to space. Jason did it. Leprechaun did it. And now it's the Critters' turn to orbit mediocrity. This one is basically Alien, if Alien was written by people who just discovered duct tape and coffee. Our heroes wander around the spaceship that looks like an abandoned warehouse, and the critters barely appear until the halfway mark, probably stuck in galactic customs. Still, they manage to cause chaos, eat some crew members, and remind us why puppets is greater than CGI every time. So the reboots, because nostalgia will never die. Fast forward a few decades, and Critters, a new binge in 2019, crawls out of the internet in a miniseries that lands hard into the comedy and gore. Then King Critters Attacks, a full reboot that somehow looks better than the Justice League's mustache CGI. The franchise just refuses to die, kind of like the actual Critters did. So, the Critters franchise is pure, chaotic comfort food. It's everything we love about 80s horror. Cheap effects, bad decisions, and monsters that look like they were designed by someone's halfway through a panic attack. It's very campy, it's fun, it's cinematic, equivalent to Taco Bell at 2 a.m. Yeah, you may regret it later, but you'll have a blast while it's going. So the next time you hear a weird scratching in your walls, don't panic. Don't call pest control, just grab a shotgun, call a bounty hunter, and remember, in space or on Earth, the critters always bite back. So I'm going to throw myself out here a little bit, and I have to say that this was probably one of my favorite horror movies growing up because there were a few of them, because they were on all the time, and because the local library carried it constantly, and it was never out of stock. So I remember going all the time, every time we would pick up a movie from the local library, that this would be one of the ones that I would actually pick up and watch. It didn't matter which one it was, didn't matter if they were in order or not. This would be one of the movies that I would watch continuously. So next on our list, Pumpkinhead, the demon you summon when you've had enough of everybody's crap. So you ever have one of those weeks where you just can't anymore, and you think, forget it. I'm going to summon a Pumpkinhead demon to deal with my problems. Well, that's Pumpkinhead, a movie that proves the 80s didn't need superheroes or CGI. Just revenge, guilt, and a monster that looks like a jack-o'-lantern and a xenomorph had a baby. So the original Pumpkinhead in 1988, revenge with no extra goo. Released in 1988 and directed by legendary effects wizard Stan Winston, you know, the guy who worked on Aliens and The Terminator, this movie had one mission: make you terrified of gourds. We meet our hero, Ed Harley, played by a human definition of haunted sadness, Lance Henriksen. He's a humble store owner, just vibing in the woods with his son and his deep emotional trauma. Then boom, some out-of-town dirt bikers show up, because nothing says 80s horror setup like reckless city kids destroying rural lives. They accidentally killed Ed's son. And instead of calling the cops or, therapy, Ed decides to go straight for the nuclear option. He hikes into the swamp, finds a creepy old witch, and basically says, "Hi, yes, I'd like to order one vengeance demon, please." And thus, Pumpkinhead is born. So let's meet our monster, shall we? Now, Pumpkinhead isn't your average slasher villain. He's not here to sneak around with a knife or play hide and seek in the shadows. No, this dude walks straight up to you, grabs you by the face, and slaps you into the afterlife like he's collecting overdue rent. And while Ed wanted revenge, he slowly realizes, oops, maybe summoning a swamp demon wasn't the best coping mechanism I could have used. Turns out, every time Pumpkinhead kills, Ed feels it. Because apparently, the demon comes with emotional Bluetooth connection. So now he's stuck sharing a psychic bond with a 7-foot-tall revenge pumpkin that's really good at parkour and worse at boundaries. So the morality and the mayhem. This movie is what happens when your morality tale meets a creature feature. It's grim, tragic, but surprisingly poetic. If poetic means lots of screaming in the woods, while a latex monster does backflips. By the end, Ed realizes the only way to stop Pumpkinhead is to stop himself, which is fairly deep for a 1980s horror movie, and in a my therapist would have a field day kind of way. So in 1994, we got Pumpkinhead 2, Blood Wings, which I don't think anybody asked for. But because Hollywood can't let good monsters stay dead, we got Pumpkinhead 2. New town, new characters, same monster. Now, with less budget and more fog machines. It's basically Revenge of the Nerds meets Pet Sematary if both movies were filmed behind a Spirit of Halloween store. A group of teens resurrect Pumpkinhead because apparently no one in the universe has ever seen a horror movie before. And once again, the demon's like, oh, you summoned me? Cool. Let me just murder everyone in a 10-mile radius. There's no emotional depth this time, just a whole lot of stabbing, lighting, and regret. So let's fast forward to 2006, where Pumpkinhead got dragged onto the Sci-Fi Channel for Pumpkinhead's Ashes to Ashes. And yes, that Sci-Fi Channel. The one responsible for Sharknado and your uncle's favorite cryptid documentaries. This time, Lance Henriksen, his ghost, literally comes back to warn people. Because even in death, he's like, guys, seriously, stop summoning the demon. The effects are rough, the acting is very questionable, and the lighting looks like someone filmed it through a fog machine at a barbecue. But you know what? It's still fun, because Pumpkinhead's still there. Still mad, and still solving his problems with murder. But wait, we weren't done yet. So in 2007, we have Pumpkinhead Blood Feud, a franchise's attempt at being, well, serious again. And by serious, I mean, what if Romeo and Juliet, but with Pumpkinhead? Yes, it's basically a Hatfield and McCoy love story with an added twist. Whenever someone gets too emotional, a demon gets summoned, like a rage-activated Alexa. There's romance, revenge, and surprising number of torches. Because nothing says eternal love like calling forth a skeletal pumpkin monster to rip your enemies apart. So how about the legacy of the pumpkin? What makes Pumpkinhead so special is that it's not just a monster movie. It's a story about guilt, consequences, and the high price of anger. Also, a giant pumpkin demon ripping people in half, which, in the 80s, was pretty cool. It's a perfect blend of tragedy and creature design, like if Frankenstein and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had an art baby. Stan Winston's monster effects are still legendary, long before CGI tried to replace all that glorious, sweaty latex magic. So what have we learned today? If someone wrongs you, maybe don't hike into the woods and summon an embodiment of rural vengeance. Maybe just write a strongly worded Yelp review instead. Because once you call the Pumpkinhead, he's not just coming for your enemies, he's coming for you, your neighbors, and probably your car insurance premiums. But hey, at least the guy's got great posture. Now, I will openly admit here that I would love to see a new version of Pumpkinhead. I wish that somebody would reboot this movie so bad. The monster in that movie, for being a latex mashup in the 80s, was phenomenal. And yes, sure, it does have characteristics of a xenomorph from the Aliens franchise. But it was like one of the most iconic horror movie creatures, I think, of the 1980s. Now into our final movie for our 80s flashback. A guilty pleasure of mine, The Monster Squad. which is the Breakfast Club of Universal Monsters. I will openly admit at this point in time with all of you that I have gone out and bought this on DVD. It did take me quite a while to get there, but I found it, and I do own it, and it is living in the bottom of a box because nobody watches DVDs anymore either. But all right, let's travel back to 1987. Again, big hair, big shoulder pads, jeans were acid washed, and every kid in America apparently belonged to a monster-obsessed clubhouse. Because tonight, we're going to dive into Monster Squad, the movie that asked, what if the Goonies met the Wolfman? And then immediately insulted him. So the opening scene of Van Helsing's failed field trip. We start 100 years ago where Van Helsing is doing what he does best, failing miserable at stopping Dracula. He's got a plan. He's got a portal. He's got priests chanting Latin like they're auditioning for a Gregorian remix album. And then, boom, total disaster. Cut to the 80s. Because apparently the portal just kind of paused for a century. So welcome to Suburbia. Monsters meet the middle school. In your average suburban town, a group of horror-loving misfits has formed what they call the Monster Squad, a secret club dedicated to watching scary movies, drawing Wolfman fan art, and knowing way too much about mummies for children who definitely still believe in Santa. So, who do we have? Sean, the leader, because he owns the treehouse. Patrick, who's Sean's best friend, and the professional one-liner machine. Horace, a.k.a. the fat kid, the token everyman who gets all the best quotes. And Rudy, the cool greaser kid with shades, a leather jacket, and a suspicious amount of monster-hunting weapons for someone who should be, well, in detention. Basically, they're like Stranger Things kids, if they were more sarcastic and less emotionally stable. But, meanwhile in the swamp, Dracula has decided it's time for his comeback tour, and he recruits his classic monster crew like he's forming the world's creepiest boy band. There's the Frankenstein monster, who's mostly confused and sad, the Wolfman, who has the body of a dad and the scream of a man who forgot his mortgage payment, the Mummy, who looks like toilet paper's revenge, and the Gill Man, who's there, just hanging around, smelling like algae and bad 1980s decisions. Together, they're on a mission to take over the world by finding an ancient amulet, because in the 80s, and everything important comes with glowing green lights. So, Dracula's plan. Dracula's plan involves summoning darkness, using this amulet, and maybe blowing up a house or two. But here's the thing. He keeps trying to act like a serious gothic villain, while driving around in a hearse with fins and hanging out in a small town sewer. This guy went from ruling castles to hiding in storm drains, like a supernatural Pennywise. You know inflation's bad when Dracula has to downgrade to municipal real estate. So, enter Phoebe. But when we get the best plot lines in the whole movie, Frankenstein's monster befriends Phoebe, the team leader's little sister. It's sweet, it's pure. It's E.T. meets Halloween Town. He helps her pick flowers. She teaches him words like bogus. And we all collectively melt. And when Phoebe introduces him to the squad, everyone just kind of, well, accepts it. Like, yeah, sure. Undead monster hanging out with my sister. Totally cool. Let's go fight Dracula now. The 1980s classic logic. So the Monster Squad finally realizes the monsters are real, and it's go time. They arm up with stakes, silver bullets, and middle school detention. Cue the iconic line of the entire movie that will live on for generations. Wolfman's got nards. That's it. That's the line. That's the moment the Monster Squad became a cult legend. Because somewhere, deep down, we all needed confirmation that yes, Wolfman does in fact have nards. So our final battle was Suburbia versus the Supernatural. The showdown goes down in the middle of town. Cars are exploding, Dracula's floating around like an angry bat in a cape store, and the Monster Squad is giving it everything they've got. Frankenstein saves Phoebe, Wolfman explodes, again, and Rudy single-handedly takes out half the monster lineup while looking like he's posing for a Marlboro ad. And finally, Phoebe, precious, innocent Phoebe, reads the magic words that open the portal to the monster dimension, sucking Dracula into another realm. She's 6 years old, holding hands with Frankenstein and banishing the forces of evil like it's a school project. Now that's power, if I've ever seen it. As the dust settles, the army shows up way too late. They got lost on the way from E.T. They ask who saved the day, and Sean proudly announces, "We're the Monster Squad." So the Monster Squad is pure 80s chaos in the best possible way. It's got some heart, humor, explosions, and monsters with questionable life insurance policies. It's like the Goonies, if the kids had access to a shotgun and fewer adult supervisors. It may not have been a box office hit, but it became something even better, a sleepover classic. Because every kid who grew up watching this movie walked away thinking, if Dracula ever showed up in my neighborhood, I'm calling my friends, grabbing my BMX, and we're going to handle it. And that, my friends, is cinema magic. So to wrap up, the 80s were a wild time. No one cared about realism. They cared about vibes, foam monsters, fake blood, and one-liners that could cut through denim jackets. So if you're tired of modern horror with its psychological depth and well-written characters, grab a bowl of popcorn, adjust your tracking, and dive back into some VHS treasures. Because in the world of 1980s horror, everything was cheaper, weirder, and somehow even better. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments which 80s horror flick either scared you or you absolutely love, or at least made you laugh so hard you spilled your ectoplasm. Thanks again for sailing the seas of nostalgia, one glorious bad movie at a time. And until next time, have a great night, everybody.